My name's Lawrence Woodward. I'm a member of Whole Health Agriculture, who's organised this session. Whole Health Agriculture, as it says on the slides, is a not-for-profit organisation, and our goal, our activity, is to help farmers to develop alternative health systems focusing on resilience, immunity, partially to end the reliance on synthetic chemicals and antibiotics, to reduce it or end the reliance, but also to develop and implement farming for health. How do we talk about health, we talk about soil health. I've got my thing. I love my soil, as everyone here does. But our view is that health is a whole system. So to talk just about soil health is only talking about one part of that. And if we look at one of the reasons we're in the mess we are, our farmed environment and our farming and the quality of our food, is because we look at things in part. We look at a so-called reductionist approach, little bits and pieces. And that's led to a specialization and intensification, which has caused real problems for health overall in our planet. Our view is that you can't look at health in that way, that health, first of all, is a process, it's not a state, and that process can be managed. But critically, health of soil, plant, animal, man, and the planet is one and indivisible. The one and indivisible thing is the key. People talk about links, the interlocking, that they're all interconnected. There's a difference between the idea of one and indivisible and interconnections. So our contention is that health of all these things matter together. And something that is ill at ease in one of these things affects everything else. So that's our contention. And we've been working with farmers now over 8 years to look at how farms can manage health. What's the systems? What's the management? How can we understand the process by which the process of health management actually transfers or moves from soil to plants, to animals, and to the quality of the food? What's the information flow, which we don't fully understand? So we don't really fully understand how to manage this process on farms. And that's the goal, that's the objective of whole health agriculture. If we look at the problems of health in our community and the crisis, the difficulties within the National Health Service, we can see really we have to change things, and to try and understand the role of food and agriculture within that process of health is critical. But the second point is now the increasing threat to food security generally. I'm sure that some of you will have been at Tim Lang's presentation yesterday afternoon. Tim presented a report which he's produced on behalf of a government department, the National Preparedness Committee, which looks at, I certainly didn't know until he told me, that there is a law, the government has to compile a risk register of risks to the UK society. Until recently, that register had 86 items on. Food is mentioned once. And food is mentioned once in relation to contamination, not in relation to quality, not in relation to diet, not in relation to supply systems. So Tim was commissioned to do this report, which is called Just in Case, and highlights the need to look at preparedness and the role of food in national preparedness against these major crises of ecology, environment, the oil crisis, logistic crisis, and so on. The key to his recommendations is that we have to start looking at a more resilient food system based on regions, based on local food production and local food consumption. Tim majors in various parts of that report about people producing food, particularly vegetables, for themselves in their gardens, in their communities, community gardens, and so on. And that's great, because we do need a cultural shift on that. What he leaves open, and the logical conclusion of that, is the role of farms. and farms in communities, farms in bioregions. Our contention is we have to look again at the role of farms and whether farms can be the basis of what we are calling a natural health service, which means changes, government policy changes, but critically it means changes in the view of how farmers see themselves and what they see themselves doing. So that is, we don't have enough time to go into that. What we'd like to do is to give you some ideas and some thoughts with my very distinguished panel, and you will realize as they start talking just how knowledgeable, experienced, and distinguished they are. So, well, we're going to start with we've shared internet platform once before, but I've known Peter Mansfield a long time. Peter was at one point, as I was, a trustee of the Soil Association. Peter started as a medical researcher. He became a GP, and then because of his background and knowledge in whole systems and whole health systems, set up a pretty unique GP or community health practice. But he can tell you more about that. But from his background, from his research, from his knowledge, from his practice, he's going to talk about the role of food, the role of farming within a health service. Peter.
Thank you, Lawrence. I've really got to start by making the point about what I mean by health. As far as I'm concerned, health is the defining thing of all life. Anything alive has some health. Health is a process, but it's a yearning, it's a wanting to create. And I think it likens best to vitality or vivacity or something of that sort, which is quite separate from metabolic activity of any kind. That's a chemical process. We're talking about something much more intangible than that, but very real. It's got a physical basis. We can even measure it if we can be bothered, though not many people do. And the reason I put that in front of everything else is that I have 3 axioms for you, and the first and most important is that food grown imperfectly lacks vitality. And because it doesn't have vitality, it doesn't create the structure it was born to have. So we end up with something that looks like a cabbage, sort of, but maybe doesn't have enough leaflets. Maybe it is less resistance to disease or pest, and basically is far less nourishing. So the consumers of food that is imperfectly grown also lack, and that includes farm animals, of course. They also lack vitality, and they become sick more easily, and they heal with more difficulty. Now, that's a completely general remark. It applies to all of living and all the disease that's consequent from inadequate living. And that's the key to a health service, is you stop that from happening. I'm afraid medicine is not the way. Dear old Wes Streeting is having a go, but he won't get there because medicine cannot make people healthy any more than green flag can make drivers good drivers. Think about that. Another very important thing, which it doesn't get said very often, is that fat-soluble biocides of any sort, and most biocides are fat-soluble, get into the fat of the body, and that includes the brain. And this goes for animals as well as it does for human beings. And we have no account of how the neurodegenerative disease, or for that matter, any other degenerative disease, arises in human beings. There's no real genetic or account for it. And by the way, all of what we're discussing this morning is over and above genetics. Genetics is chemistry. We're not talking about chemistry, we're talking about life. The point about the fat-soluble biocides is that they accumulate. We don't have very efficient means of getting rid of them once we've eaten them. And the same goes for fluoride. It accumulates in bone, but biocides accumulate in fat. And the most vulnerable fat in your body is your brain. So I don't really have to spell out the potentiality of that, do I? The third axiom I have for you is that the NHS cannot make people healthy by treating disease. They are the green flag. They'll fish you out of the ditch, but you have to have other means of learning how to drive safely from A to B. And that would be a health service, the driving school. So this is all very quick because we have to give you time to interrogate us and make your own points. But I have 3 conclusions from that. As a force for health, we may ignore the NHS. Now, that may shock some of you, but I'm afraid we have to square up to that. The NHS is for medicine. That's for when you've fallen off the road. You need the tow, you need the repair. But we shouldn't get there in the first place. We shouldn't be measuring our health in terms of how many operations we can do, for goodness sake. The second one is, as a first approximation, health is defined by vitality. Vitality generates structure over a period of process. And the key is to disease resistance across the board. Now, that's where you can focus for a health service. And the only route to regaining health is through cleaner, fresher, natural agriculture and horticulture. That's the only way. We cannot do it in any other way. Now, that is a massive task. I do pity Wes Streeting. He really doesn't have a hope. But the benefit of that task is immense. In our little Lincolnshire practice, which wasn't really a practice, it was a health service, it incidentally got the prescribing in the practice down to 50% of the national average. We didn't go for that. It just happened. People stopped asking for prescriptions because they had something else to do. I maintain that since that was done against a very hostile culture, the potential for reducing the cost of NHS medical services is something like 75% within 10 years. And if biocides were banned next year, that would be the biggest benefits you could imagine. Within about 5, people would stop sickening chronically. What do all of us have to offer to this problem? First of all, we have to create the demand for the proper food and resist buying the other stuff. That's the most important thing. Public demand comes from personal demand. Lots of people wanting the same thing. We all, therefore, need to become more sceptical of the mass media, who do what companies tell them, less trusting of authority, who on the whole are well down the curve, and much more self-reliant. It's no good expecting somebody else to do it. You've got to do it. And it does actually make a difference as soon as you start to do something better, because health is infectious. It's far more infectious than any disease I've ever encountered in 50 years of medicine. And once it gets going, it's unstoppable, and it leads to the most unexpected consequences. So enjoy.
Thank you. And thank you for keeping to the allotted time.
Oh, I'll do my best.
But I'm going to stretch it, because I just like you to, on the health is infectious point, and I know, and you also mentioned about people not trusting governments and media and information. How do you see the role of a farm or a farm in a community as part of that information process and part of that cultural change that can make health infectious within a community?
Well, that's a good question. A reference point would be the biodynamic agriculture movement. I was once a little bit involved in that in the Midlands, and that is involving the entire community in the process of living and being part of the farm. So the farm is actually the engine room of the community where all the most important things happen. That's an ideal which relatively few agricultural people can aspire to, but with that ideal in the background, it is possible to imagine all sorts of similar activities within urban and suburban situations. The importance of community is absolutely primal. People have to start helping each other and living together. It takes a village to rear a child and keep him out of prison, basically. And it takes a community to keep us all happy, bring up, realise our full potential. And the farm is, in a Ladybird book, it would be the absolute centre of all this. And it's a wonderful vision, and I hope we get somewhere near. I don't see how we can really do health any other way.
Thank you. We just set up John Newman to describe the farming system at Abbey Home Farm. It's an organic farm. Started with the usual, the normal organic principles. Not the extraordinarily good organic principles, but the conversion with that in mind. But Abbey Home Farm has grown and taken on different things. And maybe if you could explain the system and how it's developed. And
brilliant. Don't stand on the wire, it's always good. Right, good morning, everybody. Yeah, my name is John Newman. I'm the farm manager at Abbey Home Farm. Just to give you a little bit of background to Abbey Home Farm, it's 650 hectares of, I guess, very mixed agriculture. It's in the Cotswolds, down in sunny Gloucestershire. We've not seen any rain for ages, hence the suntan, and I'd do anything for a drop of rain at the moment. Background of the farm, converted to organic about 34 years ago. Really following something to do with the way that the managing partners, the son who was taking over the farm, felt the way to farm. He and his wife both felt that organic was the right thing to do. I arrived on the scene in 1992 following really a kind of conventional agricultural background, if that's such a thing, been to ag college, been managing farms chemically and all that stuff. So for me, there was a whole thing about how was I going to run a farm without interfering with what was going on in terms of treating animals, etc. So a lot of the stuff that we did in the early days was really looking at positive health. That was something that was really, really key to me about trying to have animals and a whole system. So not just animals, crops, the whole farm, being able to resist that kind of thing, whether it was infection in terms of animals, crop diseases, etc. So when you start thinking about that, and for me as the farm manager, that was almost like turning the system upside down. So instead of thinking, okay, we're going to do this, and after 3 weeks we'll worm the lambs or whatever it is, and we'll kind of stock everything really tightly and try and go for maximum output. It was about turning it all upside down and really thinking about what could the farm produce without being pushed. And that was part of the positive health thing. And alongside that, we then started getting more involved with sort of best practice and what could you do that was make things even better. And homeopathy was part of that. Alternative remedies, herbal cures, what the animals are eating, that whole kind of bigger picture, the holistic picture that helps to create health in how I see it anyway on the farm, that whole thing of what we're producing. And then, as Lawrence has said, we sort of started expanding a bit. And that then led into a farm shop. It's also led into on-farm processing. And we also have quite a lot of farm access. We've got a campsite. We've got on-farm stays. So I guess in some respects, the sort of things that we've been talking about so far, you've heard so far about that link to community, that was really something that the driving force behind what we were trying to do was to create that other link. So the first bit was how do we produce the stuff organically, and then how can we make it available? So as I say, with our farm shop, we have a lot of people who come to the farm shop buying pretty much everything that we produce on the farm. And of course, that then makes you think about what other things can you produce on the farm that you could sell in your shop. So we're a mix of some large-scale enterprises and some quite small stuff. Clearly, we can't quite grow bananas yet, although who knows with this weather doing what it's doing, it might be something it leads to. So we do bring other products onto the farm through the farm shop. But the first idea is to grow what we can on the farm. And then it's sort of like an ever-expanding cycle getting into Gloucestershire, then south of England. And then we do bring stuff in from Europe. And as I say, we can't grow everything that clearly people would want to buy. But that whole sort of thing about how it works together, and it's quite difficult in a way in the amount of time that we've got to speak. And, Lawrence has said we've got about 5 minutes, so I'm probably already halfway through that. The technicality of it all is quite tricky, and I don't want to bore you with all the ins and outs of how that works, but it is quite doable. And one of the things that I was thinking about before speaking today. You know, the question at the beginning of this, the title of this talk is Farming Our Natural Health Service ? So that for me is, can it be that? Well, yes, I think it can. The question is, how do you do it? Well, maybe some of the things we're doing go some way towards that. You're going to hear from some other people later who are doing it in other ways as well. I'm not saying what we're doing is the only thing, but we see ourselves sort of as a provider of health, partly about what people can eat, partly about access to the farm. Because don't forget, there's that massive health benefit of whether it's just walking around the farm, you know, having time to relax, having time to talk. We have a farm nursery as well, preschool nursery. So we bring kids onto the farm, all those connections. And it's about trying to think in the widest sense, I think, about what we can do as a farm and then expanding it into the whole kind of community thing. What's interesting, we were also involved, to be my last point, with a sort of best practice thing back in the, crikey, it's about 6 years ago, EU project, ORC, Organic Research Centre, were facilitating it on. And it was across Germany and Austria and UK, looking at different farms and how did we see health and how did we measure it? And that's part of that whole thing as well. Soil health, yes, clearly one of the first things. A whole range. We ended up with 10 principles, and you can look it up online if you want to check it all out. But it was quite interesting about how farmers judge health and how farmers feel, and a whole lot about intuition as well, about maybe doing things that you as a farmer think is the right thing to do, that then hopefully ends up producing that kind of wider holistic health across the whole farm and out into the community. I do. Thank you.
The project that John talked about, and a number of other people here, John Pawsey at the end was part of that process. There are some leaflets on the Organic Research Centre website that set out these points of how farmers saw health and how they link together. Now, if I was sat at the back in my kind of critical, grumpy mode, I'd be saying, yeah, all very well, but how do we afford to do it? And where's the money coming from? And that's a good point. So our contention that farmers need to see themselves differently and see their role in the community as different, also means we have to convince governments and some key agencies, not least the environmental conservation bodies, who just focus on farms as conservation or ecological things and seem to forget about food production. And nobody ever talks about health. And how DEFRA can produce a scheme that talks about public goods for public money for public goods and not include food and health as part of a public good is totally beyond me. But I've given up trying to work out what the hell goes on in DEFRA. But the question, can farmers do this without public money, is a real question. The fact is that there are farmers who've changed their attitudes to health without public money because they've done it themselves. Pammy Riggs started with her husband an award-winning poultry production system based on the principles of positive health management, which they developed without any public money in their communities in North Devon. And Pammy's going to describe in a little bit of detail the approach and the techniques that were used in developing that award-winning system around what she described as positive health management systems. Pammy.
Everybody else has notes. I just open my mouth and let my belly rumble. So I may be jumping around. Lawrence is right. I used to work with very posh horses, Olympic horses, £150,000 way back in the 70s, you know. And then I decided I wanted to do chickens. And I was told chickens were 33 pence. And I'm like, am I meant to treat them like nothing? Because when I was treating these horses, it was like, yes horse, no horse, pat you, give you this. I thought, I can't do that. It's an animal, and I have a connection with animals. I can't be horrible to it. So how am I going to do it? I was doing this to feed my family because I didn't want to eat meat. But I come from a boy family, and boys want to eat meat. And if I tried to feed them a nut roast, they would sit chanting, "Do your utmost to eat your nut roast. Do your utmost to eat your nut roast." So I had to get some meat onto the plate somewhere along the line. Otherwise, as a mother, I would be just shunned. So there we are. So we started. Husband and I met just within half an hour. We both wanted to do the small holding thing. Came not from background of farmers or farmers ourselves, but backgrounds of playing on everybody else's farms, with ponies or herding the sheep or whatever you were given to do, sheep dipping included. So that was that. So then I decided if I was going to do these chickens, we were going to do it organically. The organic actual standards of the time, 90s were very different from what they are now. We looked at them and we couldn't quite understand what they meant. There were too many annexes this and annexes that. So we thought, put the book down. Let's work out ourselves how to be really nice to these animals so that our conscience says we can kill. My conscience says we can kill them and eat them. My husband would have picked anything up and wrung its neck and just said, eat that. So I'm a little bit different. So what I did was I got a paper and pencil, and we had a hen with chicks, and I followed her for 4 days. I wandered round following her. And what she did was just so amazing. She'd pick things up and crack them and chuck them in front of her chicks so that they knew what they were allowed to eat. So she'd get a worm, chuck it in front of the chicks. She'd pick up a bit of grain, break it, and chuck it in front. Pick up a bit of greenery, chuck it in front. If they got cold, there was a special noise she made, and they came back to her. Otherwise, they were in the normal ambient temperature, whereas my organic rules were telling me I had to keep my chicks at a certain temperature for 3 weeks, and then I'd put them out. And I'm going, they're going to go out, they're going to go, grass, I can't eat that. It's like saying to your child when it's 17, have a broccoli, dear. It's just not going to happen. So I did this system like that, and we set up, looking at the rules of how to build houses and stuff. Got lovely practical man farmer. Mark for house was brilliant. The other ones were a bit off. He's 6'4", so he needed big doors. This was really important. If you're going to be able to work in the wind and everything, it has to be practical enough as well as everything else. We had a playpen outside, and unless it was roaring rain, our day-old chicks went outside on day 1 or 2 with a camo net over in order to be a jungle canopy for them, because I had to be the mum for these chicks because I was buying them in as day-olds to have. I'm not a mother hen, I'm not there all the time, so I had to encourage these chicks to do the things that their mother would have done but without me there. My aid was homeopathy. And I'm just so pleased to hear Peter's idea of health is at the next level up from your body. The thing that we've all got it, otherwise we'd be dead and lying on the floor. So whatever that thing is that keeps us alive is the thing to encourage the health of. So for me, coming into whole health agriculture, which is a really nice, succinct way of saying positive health management system, which was my one. That was the one that really helped our farm to stay vital. But I think Lawrence came to our farm, and I really think there's a buzz. There's a buzz about it. We went through foot and mouth, and we felt as if there was a canopy like this, but of shine over our farm, keeping it healthy. And within that shine, that's the whole farm organism. You get messages. So I was informed by the animals about what they wanted to do. First of all, by following this one around. But it got, can I go weird? It got weirder than this. Because this is real vitality. So we have an information system over our farm. We did meat birds primarily to begin with, because I was so worried about being organic and having things for a long time. I thought that they might get unhealthy. So I thought, if you have things that you kill early, they're still healthy. That's fine. Just get them. Whoop, donk. Didn't really want to hang on to things for too long because I was worried. And then we said, well, we had the farm shop as well, by the way, and I went to farmers markets. and we did the first kind of mail order. So I had to sort of like broaden my spectrum. So I said, we got to have eggs. So that means like old hens. No. How am I going to cope with that? But we had a good rotation going around, and we had pigs, by the way, and we had cattle. So that's just, another story. We'll stick with the hens. So when we got some nice hens for eggs, and this house that we pulled around. And then my husband said, in the organic rules, it says you can light your chickens for 16 hours a day. I didn't really want to, but because I'm still married to him meant that we didn't argue a huge amount. Because I think if you argue a lot, you don't want to stay together, do you? So I let him have his way. So he bought this thing called a rooster booster, which is completely the wrong thing, because roosters don't actually lay eggs. But it was called a rooster booster, and it cost £121. And I was, we were really so poor. I'm not joking. I mean, part of the fear of a vet's bill was something. So he got this rooster booster, and it was something that brought the lights on, and it was all timed very carefully and techie, which in the 90s was, like a big deal, to bring the lights on and then allow them to fade at night. So he set it all up, and I'm kind of not looking, thinking, I'm not really joining in with this, hens. This is your deal. Set it up one night. I went down to open the chickens the next day, and one went jump, jump, jump in my face. And I looked at it and I thought, ooh. And then I'm going to... You hold my mic. I need two hands. Okay. Hold my mic. And then behind my head was written, "This smacks of intensification." And I thought, that's a big word, isn't it? And it really was. It was written up there behind my head. So this is like the information system we're talking about in Vitality. So I went back to the house and I sat down and I'm shuffling around, shuffle. And husband says, "You need to tell me something, don't you?" And I thought, yeah, it's not about sex, it's fine. And I said to him, "The chicken just said," well, he's used to me, so that's fine, because I've had horses say things too. So I said, "The chicken just said, this smacks of intensification, they don't like it." And he said, "Neither do I, because at 5 o'clock in the morning from that house, a shaft of light had come up through, we don't shut our curtains, by the way, we don't have neighbours, up above his side of the bed and woke him up." And I thought, how did that work? Never got turned on again. Hens still laid. So that's being nice. That's the Vitality.
Have you finished?
No
brilliant.
more. Open your mouth. Let your belly rumble. It stopped rumbling. Stop.
So yeah, when I went to visit, so the thing about farms and making the systems work. So Pammy told me the chicks go out after 2 days, and I said they can't. That's just not possible. They'll die. Anyway, so I had to go and see it. Now it's always bothered me. I know everything in nature on farms has got a place and a role. It's always a struggle to work out what the role of docks are on a farm. And I kind of convinced myself that the role of docks, rooting and all that kind of breaking compaction and stuff like that, absolutely. On their farm, the role of docks is to provide a shelter, the leaf, for the little chicks when they go out at 2 days old, because they were a brilliant canopy for these chicks. So
can I just add that we got all our free keratin and protein from the larva and the dock beetles on there too?
Yeah. Yes, good point. Okay. So you will notice that the person at the end is not Alice Pawsey, hasn't had a sex change or whatever. Alice has sat here. John Pawsey, who I'm sure many people who've been to Groundswell a lot know John Pawsey and the name of John. John Pawsey is a legend. At least he says it. He tells me he is, anyway. But the partnership between... So Pammy told about the partnership between her and Richie. The partnership between Alice and John is equally interesting, and having had a conversation with them about this presentation the other day, that was also interesting. Anyway, so Alice is here to correct him when he goes wrong, but John is going to talk about how their farm has developed, again, from a conventional system through an organic system, and how they're moving on their journey, and to consider, again, the role of the farm in health, the role of the farm in our natural health service, where they are and how that, all of the kinds of things we've been talking about, how that is now another part of their journey. John.
Thank you, Lawrence. Yes, Phil Jarvis. I don't know if anybody knows Phil Jarvis, but he came from, he was a farm manager at Allerton. And whenever I slightly feel too big for my boots, I remember Phil once put on social media, John Pawsey is my favourite organic farmer in Shimpling. And it's true. So when Lawrence asked Alice and I to do this, it was a very interesting conversation because we started sort of thought, well, what have we got to offer this session? And actually, it made me think back actually where we started and where we've got to now, and that's what I'm going to really sort of run through in terms of what's changed since we converted to organic, which is now 25 years ago. And so the first thing that when you convert to organic production, it's cold turkey sort of situation where everything goes overnight. And so you have to start thinking in a very different way immediately, which is challenging. And we'll come to that. So the first thing you have to do is you change your rotation. Actually, we're going to go back one step, actually. One of the reasons for converting to organic was because I used to do all the spraying on the farm. And a thing happened that really sort of changed the way I viewed what we were doing. And the thing that happened is that when we were spraying our crops and we're told they're plant protection products, and we think we're just actually protecting our crops using the pesticides and insecticides and fungicides that we use. But actually, the nature of the sprayer, you spray absolutely everything. You're spraying stuff that you can see, and you're spraying stuff that you can't see. And when that's coupled with an understanding that nature is declining on your farm and also your soils are in poor health, you suddenly realize you're in a lose-lose situation. And so that was the sort of big changing factor for me. I won't go into any more detail here now. But so the rotation changes. And the great thing about the rotation changes is it gets longer. You start growing different crops. We used to grow literally just winter wheat, some spring barley, and some oilseed rape. And now we grow a huge range of crops, and they're all sown at different times. So nature has a chance to breathe. It's not just all autumn sown. But the other great thing about that, and talking about your own health, is that you get re-skilled. You start learning new agronomic techniques. So every new crop is a challenge, and there's risks and joys to every single crop. But actually, it makes, the whole rotation makes life completely stimulating. And also, we hadn't had animals on the farm since the 1960s, since the outbreak of foot and mouth. And we got sheep back on the farm, and having animals back on the farm was something that really just changed everything. Not just seeing a sort of a moving landscape rather than just a load of crops. Also re-skilling ourselves and learning how to look after animals. The other thing is when you're making big changes that you have to bring people on board with you. So you are re-skilling yourself, but you're also re-skilling the people that work for you. And the only way to do that successfully is to bring them along with your vision. And also, to a certain extent, your neighbours who are looking at your contemporaries. You've got to you tell them the story and bring them along with you as well. And so that just makes everything much more vital and much more interesting in terms of the action of farming. And then the other thing you have to do is you have to start, before we were farming organically, literally, we were just farming commodities. We put them in a shed. Somebody came and picked them up. We had no idea where they were going to. And actually, to be quite honest, if I'm honest about it, I mean, our grain store full of wheat, I didn't even associate it as being food. It was just a commodity going somewhere. But now we have strong relationships with our customers. We market everything through an organisation which is run by farmers, owned by farmers, called Organic Arable, who have a stand here, and they're just across the way here, so do go and see them. But, engaging with our customers and actually realising that we were producing food that people wanted to buy, was a new thing to us. It sounds ridiculous, but it is a thing. And the other thing, going back to my sort of experience on the sprayer, is that nature just returns to your farm by farming in this way, when you're not using any pesticides. You've got longer rotations. You've got grass in your fields rather than just crops all the time. The soil gets a chance to breathe. And so nature naturally comes back. It's nothing that we've particularly done within the farm rotation. There's other bits we have done, but within the farm rotation, nature returns to your farm. And we do lots of surveys. I mean, I my thing is birds, and I'm not an expert in everything. Unbelievable, I know, but I'm not. And thank you, Lawrence. I am a legend. But we have surveys done by the Suffolk Wildlife Trust, and they come out, and things are changing, which is incredibly exciting. But then, of course, you realise that, you know, to have a healthy farm, you also have to manage your hedges in a way that actually birds can nest them. They have to have thick bottoms, so all those birds are going to get predated on by magpies and jays can get in that thick bottom, and they can nest successfully, and lots of other different structures within hedges to promote birds. But also your woods, certainly all the farmers run, certainly all the properties on the farm run with renewable energy, and because you just have this change of mindset. And so our woods have been brought back into coppice. They've been traditionally coppice for a long time. But also putting in, really annoying is that in the arches, they put in their agroforestry just before I put mine in. So everyone thinks that I put in because of the arches. Very annoying. It was, of course, because of Martin Wolf and nothing to do with the archers at all, even though I love the archers. I've never heard the end of an episode because I'm usually asleep by then. And the other huge thing was, you know, people coming onto the farm. Nobody was interested in what we were doing. And then suddenly we had groups of farmers, you know, wanting to come and see what we were doing. Initially, interestingly, they were sort of quite aggressive. And you know, I was never selling this as something that everybody else should do. It was something that I wanted to do. And they'd actually asked if they could come and have a look. But I did have one chap who used to get incredibly cross, you know, at the end of every session. He came 3 times. And he would go through the whole farm walk, which he wasn't paid for, and I'd probably give him some beer afterwards. And then afterwards, he'd castigate me, saying, "I think you're morally wrong doing what you're doing." And on the 3rd time he did it, I said, "Look, I love you, but I said this is very bad for your health. And actually, I don't think you should come again unless you come with a different attitude." And actually, we've been very good friends ever since. Anyway, I had 12 vicars once as well, which was fantastic. Just very briefly, because I'm going on a bit, but the other thing is that heightened observation. I mean, you have to be looking at everything. You have to understand complex processes. And I'm just a farmer, but just getting your head around what's actually happening is incredibly important. I think going back to if you're left to make those decisions, you know, you haven't got an agronomist and there's no quick fixes, there's no silver bullet, you have to reskill yourself. So as far as your own personal development is concerned, it's incredibly important. Most importantly, when you've got off the input treadmill, you can, you know, you really do feel that you're taking back control of that your business, and that certainly makes me feel incredibly healthy. And so lastly, sort of going back to and sort of, you know, rounding up everything I've sort of said, and I hope that this makes sense, is that, you know, talking about, you know, farming being the NHS is for people. Well, I don't think it's not just for people. It's for our domestic and our wild animals, and is also the NHS service for nature.
So just a quick commercial break. John mentioned bringing animals back onto their predominantly arable farm. Whole Health Agriculture has a stand called whatever it is, F12, which is all set out about the opportunities and the problems and the challenges of bringing livestock back onto farms where have been predominantly arable, where maybe the farmers don't have the skills, how you bring on sheep or cattle as part of the grazing management. So go and have a look at the information that's on the Whole Health Agriculture stand. If you're interested or want to know, or if you're a farmer wanting to bring livestock back onto the land, how to do that. And of course, if you're a regenerative farmer or an organic farmer, if you're a regenerative farmer and you're bringing conventionally managed animals onto your land, where maybe you've got a contract shepherd or a grazier or whatever, and they're using the full range of veterinary products, all of the residues of those veterinary products are cocking up your soil, the soil you're presenting, because all of those things damage earthworms, soil microorganisms, soil fungi, and so on. So that you can't think about getting the animals back onto a regenerative farm unless you're actually managing the animals, or whoever's managing the animals for you do it in a different way. So coming back to the theme, end of commercial break, coming back to the theme of a different role for farms as part of a health service. Can that be managed? I think everyone said we can do that. We probably don't have time, but maybe we can talk about how the structures might need to change, government support, government attitudes might need to change. But what I'd like just to ask is Peter's point about messaging and about information and about the role of communication with people who may visit your farm because they like a farm walk or because they're interested in birds or whatever. Is it possible for farmers, can you see how farmers can actually start talking in a different way about health, about food quality, and the holistic approach to health? What can farmers do that, or can they be trained to do that? Do you see that as a legitimate role for farmers, and how can that be managed? And is there a way in which you as farmers can relate to health practitioners generally in making this cultural change about the role, the attitude of positive health and the roles farms can play in it? Can you see how that works, John?
Yeah, great to go first. Yes, I think you can. We do quite a lot. Obviously, having the farm shop for us is a really nice interface for a lot of people. It's quite easy for us to explain kind of what we do with the product that we put through the shop, and we've just got lots of signage and all that sort of stuff. The other thing that we do is quite a lot of regular farm walks, open days, that sort of stuff. Me talking to people and other people talking to people. We also have a whole connection with school visits from disadvantaged kids. We do residential visits, all that stuff. But it's still, I think you still have a slight thing when you start to talk as a farmer about, if you kind of slightly get out there, if you like, a bit like Pammy saying, you get into that weird moment. And if you're not careful, you can lose your audience as well. So you've got to sort of pitch it so you bring people with you. That's relatively easy when you're talking to a group, even a group this size, although that's still quite challenging, but much more difficult in terms of policy stuff. I mean, we've had visits from DEFRA, all sorts of stuff, trying to explain what we're doing, and it just is straight over the top.
I'm in Devon, in amongst a lot of very conventional farmers, and some of them don't even know what the word regenerative is. At the moment, the farmers themselves are so under siege. They can't get the help that they used to have. The cheap labour from European countries. I think they feel under siege and so busy that their heads are spinning, and they feel like everyone hates them. They do. There's a lot of farmers down at our end that sort of feel like government does not like farmers. So it's very hard for them. It's very hard for them. And then just at another point, I was exceedingly lucky to be at the beginning of the farmers' markets. Now, they were started up by social scientists, really, who got that going, and then gradually the farmers took on the role of chairing them. People like myself wanted to keep them going, and so we chaired them. But the fear of getting out there with your stuff in front of people, it's, some of them, we used to have a farmer over there, we called him Mr. Glum because he looked so miserable, but actually he was terrified. He was terrified. He needed to do something to have more money from his farm because he was doing good produce, good conventional produce, but to get out there and actually say it in front of people, because farmers by nature live in a big space with no one else around them, They're not going to discos every night. In fact, young farmers' clubs were sort of brought together in order to have some social life at all. So it's hard for farmers unless people want them to be like that. So I think they need some love. I do, honestly.
Okay. I have some comments about that. John, can you see this communication?
I think you made a very good point. I think farmers at the moment I do feel with their backs against the wall, and I think so getting to communicate something else is going to be very difficult. I would say that, but not impossible. I would say that in our own case, and John's mentioned it, the school visits are really important, and Alice does all the school visits, which is why she should be doing this bit. And we were talking about the other day actually what seeds are you sowing, and I think if they just go away and in 25 years remember one good thing from that school visit, that would probably be enough. I think, some farmers are good communicators and some are not. And we had a friend of mine came and told me about this fantastic new sort of, glamping site he'd put in his farm, and he couldn't wait and he'd spent all this money. And I said, but Jim, you hate people. So it is a problem. I mean, some people can do it and some people can't. And but I think that, to be honest, Lawrence, I'm not sure how it's going to happen. I want it to happen.
Okay. I'm going to ask early warning. I'm going to ask you, Peter, to just kind of comment on the other side, what nutritionists or health professionals or the health community, how they would react to communicating or liaising with farmers to make it easier for farmers. But in a second. Before that, just to respond to some things that you've said. First of all, one of the key things arising from Tim Lang's work is that communities, citizens, cannot any longer rely on governments, especially unlike some countries where governments are really preparing for crises like Sweden, Finland, Latvia, Estonia, Switzerland, proper conversations with citizens about the role of citizens and what they can do in the event of crises. Our government's not even thinking about it. Or they actually do put it in papers, but they don't actually communicate with it. And we do need, as citizens, to talk to and persuade and lobby government to recognise the role of farmers in a health community in the process of health. We have to actually convince some organisations who present and project as being on the side of farmers, for example, the NFU, some of the wildlife trusts, conservation bodies, about the bigger role of farmers in health as opposed to just conservation managers or purveyors, producers of commodity crops. But the point that Tim was making is we have to do things for ourselves. Now, it might be difficult, but this change in the view of how the farming community as a whole sees themselves as individuals and as a community are the kinds of things that will begin to make farmers loved, because society doesn't really recognize what farmers do for them. And we talk about CSAs, that they're wonderful, community-supported agriculture, but it's rights and responsibilities on both sides. There should also be agriculture support communities. So that kind of interaction, that role, it's a mental change that farmers need to make, because to claim and justify a central role in the health process within civil society. But it does mean change also on the other side. So if farmers suddenly start talking about health, quality of food or whatever, how will that be? Will farmers get support from health professionals, the medical professional, the alternative medical professionals? Will those professionals see a role for food quality, and what farmers are doing within that picture?
Not on the whole. I think the problem, I once heard of an agricultural gentleman being asked the way to Cork, and he thought for a moment, he said, I wouldn't start from here. I think that's where we are in this situation. But I do feel quite strongly that there is a large minority, that's all, but a large minority of the public are desperate to do whatever they can to make this world livable for their grandchildren. And they will recycle down to the last half ounce of plastic. I've seen them doing it in the bins outside our flats. And they will, when for example, many years ago, in the 80s, I think, the government published a leaflet called Look at the Label. Do any of you remember Look at the Label? Probably not. And the idea was to reassure us all that all the chemicals that were put in our food were really quite good for us. So I, for amongst others, published. Well, we produced through the Soil Association a pamphlet. Look again at the label, and it sold like hotcakes, because people were very suspicious of what was going on in their food, and they wanted ways to. And of course, in the end, if farmers let's start with the public. If individuals only buy what they are prepared to eat, and if they can't buy it, they buy the ingredients and make it themselves. If we took that step, that would be the biggest step towards a sustainable climate you could imagine, because that would create a hunger which would become public. It wouldn't just be private. There'd be lots of people with this mood, a hunger for proper food. And that gives farmers a market. I get the feeling that farmers' markets and farm shops need to go into the suburbs. It's lovely having them on the country roads and so on, and a lot of people will go out to them deliberately the weekend to do at least a large proportion of their weekly shop. But we've got to find ways of getting farm shops effectively into someone other than Borough Market, just much more general and much more, as it were, down market. But it's really up market. Whatever the prices are, the quality is what counts, not the quantity of cash you pay for it. And of course, if you do pay the extra, you end up eating less of it anyway, just because it satisfies so much sooner. I just have one comment of a much broader nature, indicating how important the farmer is in this equation. In the event of a disaster involving the British public, the only farms that will sustain their local communities or any other community are the organic ones, because they will have a sustainable supply of everything, provided they get water. Everybody else will be waiting for supplies of fertilizer and biochemicals which will never come again. And those farms will be sterile, and the neighbourhoods will die off when they finish plundering other people's produce. I mean, the doomsday scenario is worth a thought occasionally, though we don't wish it upon ourselves, just to appreciate the importance of the really sustainable heart of our society, our civilization. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Just a final point. We, Whole Health Agriculture, and again, just come and visit our stand, we can have these conversations. We are aware some farmers are doing brilliant things, and we're absolutely convinced that the role of farms, the role of producers, farms large and small, connected to their communities, is a critical part of dealing with a crisis that is already happening, which is a crisis of health. Absolutely everywhere, at all classes, all stages, all strata of our society, everyone is in a crisis of health. Someone said in Patrick Manaway's session yesterday, some of us are old enough to remember a time when hardly anyone had allergies, and why suddenly almost every family has someone there who's got some kind of allergy. And this, it's easy to say, but it seems to me irrefutable that this is something to do with the quality of our food, the kinds of chemicals that we're using in food, the kinds of chemicals we're using in our so-called healthcare, the kinds of chemicals we're using in the kitchens, in our domestic situations. We have to get off that treadmill. We have to change that. And the other point, farmers should really, as Peter said, you should only farm or buy what you would be prepared to eat. Only farm, produce the quality that you would be prepared to eat yourselves, and then stand behind it. It's, again, always, I mean, I know there's a real sense of farming community, all farmers are together in it, and that's absolutely true. But I cannot for the life of me understand why farmers who are producing and go to the trouble of producing high quality, top quality food are in a position of defending farmers who are producing stuff that's far from top quality, which is an animal welfare disaster. And I think the farming community have got to actually own that, be proud of what they're doing, but also be clear that not everything in the farming community, not all farmers are producing that kind of stuff. And we need a differentiation. We can't pretend that an intensive feedlot beef system is the same as an extensive grazing system, and farmers should be saying that, not leaving it to people like me to say it, because it's easy for me to say it. Farmers should be saying it. So this is part of the change of identity for farmers, and really grasping and be proud of what they're doing, what they're producing, how they're managing land, and recognize that whatever they're doing is part of the process of managing health. And we should claim that for the farming community as something that is a legitimate, valid, and critical role for agriculture moving forward. Thank you very much for attending. Thank you for all the speakers. It's great. Thank you very much.